And when somebody as important and influential as a guy who leads a church of 2.1 billion people says that atheist extremism caused one of the biggest catastrophes, if not the biggest catastrophes in human history, sort of gives us a bad rep. A lot of debaters also like to pull out Pol Pot and Stalin as atheists, and that's a little more accurate because they did not believe in God. They kind of believe that they were God, but that's a little different. But anyway, at this point, I just want to say that atheism is not a political philosophy and it's not a worldview. Atheism is simply, as I said before, the rejection of the claim that there is a deity. Or that you can say that there is a deity, or know that there is a deity, depending on which sort of form it takes in a person. That does not make somebody a communist. That does not make them a capitalist. That does not make them Bill O'Reilly. That does not make them Keith Olbermann. It doesn't make them anything politically. It doesn't change their worldview. It doesn't make their political stance on anything. It's a simple rejection of the claim. And it's very hard to base your whole life on nothing. Something that is not anything in particular. So moving on. And here I like to use the Joker's little phrase, and here we go. The evidence provided shows that this negative view of atheism is certainly not an uncommon occurrence. I don't know how many people I had to convince of that right now, but that's something I wanted to get off my chest. The rest of this presentation will be dealing with, 1, why these monikers given to atheism and atheists are not true, and why they are detrimental to our society. And B, why it is important to go out and change minds in hope of an interfaith discussion.
Ben, can I
Yes.
ask a question about your use of the word interfaith? What
Sure.
do you mean by that?
I'm actually going to get into that a little bit because I have very specific things I want to say about that.
Okay.
The general term of interfaith is not something I particularly like,
Okay, good.
and I want to talk about that a little bit. So, getting on back to the point of atheists don't do good. You might recognize those faces, especially if you work in business or know anything about the internet or really rich people. That's Bill Gates. He kind of started Microsoft and a lot of other things. Second richest person in the world, which is something I'm sure a lot of us would like to be. He donated over $26 billion to charity. I would say that's good. I don't think many people would say that's bad. And then Warren Buffett, we have the third richest person in the world, pledged to give 99% of his wealth to charity when he dies. So this campaign that's up on the board in front of you is the Good Without God campaign. It was started by this, I believe the ISSA, which is the Illinois Secular Student Association, or something to that effect, Service Association. And they had this campaign on buses, on billboards, just to try to do a little bit of what I'm doing right now, which is saying that atheists do good things, and we're not necessarily this nihilistic group of people that hates the world and wants everything to burn and die. And then just a little closer example to us, we have the Ethical Society. I've already mentioned some of the work they did. I'm sure Brent, at the end of this, could give a little more about what the Ethical Society does on charity and good works. Having been here a few times in my life and enjoyed the experience, I know that this is a good organization and does good things. On the bottom, I have some links. Many of you may have heard of Oxfam. It's a secular organization that gives much of the aid that organizations like Doctors Without Borders gives to people who need medicine in countries. And the other links are links to atheist or secular or specifically non-religious charities. I don't really feel like I need to open that up right now. I meant at the end, if anybody wants to see that, I can do that. So at the very highest level, we can dispel the myth that atheists don't do good. If you look even lower, you have the volunteer work of many students. You have the work of people, just every day-to-day people at their jobs, giving money to the people outside of Schnucks or whatever like that. Doing good works because doing good for humans is good. And as the Ethical Society says, deed before creed. Going on to the next slide. I think at this point we really need to spell out what atheism is. I know I've made my short one-liner about it, but I think this is where Bishop Rice might have been a little confused. Atheism is not nihilism. Nihilism is a philosophy. Nihilism is the philosophy that there's no inherent meaning in anything. Depending on what form of nihilism you take, sometimes that turns into sort of an existentialism where you build your own meaning into things and you find meaning that way. Sometimes nihilism takes a little bit more of a nasty turn and is a little more negative. But I think we should be very precise to say that atheism is not nihilism, and those are very different things. Mostly, first of all, because atheism is not a philosophy. And I already gave my little brief defense of nihilism there. People who are nihilists often put meaning into things and find their own meaning into things and do good works in that way. But atheism is not a philosophy. Rejecting a claim is very hard to make into a philosophy. It's sort of the rejection of a philosophy if you are going to deem religion a philosophy. I don't think I would do that personally. But it's a rejection of religion. It's not its own made-up system of beliefs or... that's the best way I can put it. As a philosophy major, we like to use philosophy very that's not a word. Very slipperyly? Not a word. But in a very slippery manner. Loosely. There you go. We like to use the term philosophy loosely. So it still doesn't fit atheism in there. Not a thing. Number 3. Atheism is not the hatred of God. As I wrote there, it's really hard to hate something you don't think exists. Yeah. I think I can leave it at that. Number 4. Atheism is simply the denial of a claim that a deity exists. Anything else is the philosophy of an atheist, not the philosophy of atheism. Everybody's unique. We kind of know this through many different things, and I think you just are going to have to take me on face value on that. But one's philosophy is not, as we can see in the church and as we can see in non-belief, is not their religion per se. I think if I just look at my friends, many of whom are Catholic, I have lots of conservative friends, I have lots of liberal friends. I have lots of moderate friends, and I have lots of friends of all sorts of the spectrum. Same thing for atheists. Even on our blog, we have people who are very far right, very far left, right in the middle. They have certain views on how we should help out the tsunami that just recently happened in Japan, and my condolences there. Or we can talk about sports and what we think about who's going to win UEFA Champions League or the Super Bowl. The last statement is kind of why I think this is a problem. These confusions make people believe that atheists have no moral value and have a worldview completely different than their own. This is why 50% of people would not vote for a qualified presidential candidate who is an atheist, and why Bishop Rice and others make the comments they do. As I've heard from many students at this event, I think one of Bishop Rice's main confusions is that atheism is nihilism. The two are very different, as I've laid out for you, and when you think one is the other, you can sort of make statements like atheism, people who are nihilists don't necessarily have to go do these things. First of all, nobody necessarily has to go do these things. People do it because they're good people or they believe they're doing a good thing. If you want to take even the cynical view at it, it's because in some way it benefits themselves. Selfish gene and things like that. I don't want to get too far into that. But people do good because doing good is good. Or people do good because it makes them feel good. People are always going to do good, in my opinion. You can argue with me on that if you want. And to think that atheism is nihilism and they don't think there's any meaning in anything is not right. And I think he's actually maybe slightly confused about nihilism. Alright, moving on. So, as Stephen mentioned earlier, I want to talk about, I wish I could see that. It says, the complicated task of interfaith. What about humanism? Question mark. So, here's the definition, often found online. I don't remember if I took this from Wikipedia or somewhere else. But it says, the definition is, the terms of interfaith, or interfaith dialogue, refer to a cooperative and positive interaction between people of different religious traditions, and spiritual or humanistic beliefs, at both the individual and institutional level, with the aim of deriving a common ground and belief through a concentration on similarities between faiths, understanding of values, and a commitment to worldview. Commitment to the world, excuse me. Often interfaith dialogue recognizes all faiths as equal in standing and collective importance. By that definition, you can clearly see that this is based on very positive aspects of belief, and a commitment to a pluralistic world, which I think is very important given the current climate that we live in. Now, many of you are going to call me a cynic for this next slide, but this is kind of what I think of that. It's so fluffy, I'm going to die. It's very nice. It sounds very pretty. It's all very nice, but I think there's some very important inherent problems with that definition of interfaith, which I'm going to go on to now. How many of you seen that movie, by the way? Pretty good. Pretty good. And I'm going to blink on the name of it. Despicable Me. Pretty funny. In this scene, the little girl, the supervillain / father of the kids, wins her that thing, and she grabs it, and she says in a very low voice for her age, "It's so fluffy, I'm going to die." So I thought that kind of was good. I don't know why, but it was kind of good. So here are some pros and cons of that. I think first we must establish that, by definition, non-religious people would not be included in this conversation. They specifically mention faith and spirituality. I think this is evidenced from what you can find in the news. In other places, there was recently an interfaith convention, one of the bigger interfaith conventions in the Middle East of the United States. I want to say in Kentucky, but don't quote me on that. And they, I believe it was one of the secular alliances, asked if they could be part of it, asked if they could come and have this interfaith discussion with Catholics, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists. You get the drift. And they were rejected from coming. I think that also points to the confusion about what atheism is. But anyway, so like I said, this could be part of my cynicism of the interfaith movement. But here's some pros and cons, I think, of this whole idea. I think if non-religious people aren't included, which I think is very important, I think it will allow for the improvement of the image of non-religious. If we're allowed to be in these discussions and have this sort of dialogue, I think people will find out a lot more about what we're finding out today, and that atheists are not bad people. They're not trying to take over the world and burn down all the churches. Not really a particular goal of mine, or I don't think too many other people. I think interfaith is very important to the workplace. Like it or not, we live in a very pluralistic society. There's people of many different beliefs, and if you don't have some sort of integration in your workplace, it's not going to work out so well. A deeper understanding of the multitudes of faith traditions in the world. I think on both sides of the aisle in this sort of religious debate, people sort of like to straw man the other. I think on the atheist side, I think as much as I love the man, I think Chris Hitchens does that a lot. And I think on the other side, we could point to people like Deepak Chopra and other people who like to straw man what atheism is or what Catholicism or something else is, and attack it at its weakest point. I think through some sort of interfaith dialogue, we'll get a better and more full understanding of why somebody believes something and how it benefits them in their life. Now here are the cons. And this is where I want to see what you all think, and this is kind of where I want to start the discussion, and you can mention anything from the other sides as well. I think there's an inherent respect in the definition we just looked at for belief versus non-belief. And I don't think that is a good way to start the conversation when one side is already winning. There needs to be an equal time given to all religions and non-religions in that sort of respect. Second point is, I think there's an assumed value for all forms of belief. If I'm going to make any sort of specific critique of religion right here, I think there are certain things in religions that are not humanistic, and I think they're very bad for our world. We could talk about those in the discussion, but I think when you assume that everything in religion or in non-religion is valuable and important, that you are not giving the full sort of critical mind aspect you are supposed to give to something. I hope I don't offend anybody by saying things like this, but when you look at something like Sharia law in Islam, or the rejection of gay marriage by some of the churches in Christianity, I don't think those are good things. And I think we should be able to talk about these things openly and honestly, and critique them at face value for what they are. We shouldn't just say, "Oh, that's okay. It's okay if you blow up Twin Towers or don't let people marry." That's not, in my opinion, that's not okay. And we should be able to critique that even in an interfaith discussion, just as somebody from the religious side can come back and critique you on your beliefs or philosophies. So it kind of goes into the last point. I guess I kind of skipped ahead a little bit. But it says, I think it's limiting in scope and ignorant of pertinent flaws in certain religious perspectives. I've already said my bit about that, so we'll go on to the next slide. So here's the new/old approach that I kind of want to throw out there. The label of interfaith. Is it unnecessary and limiting? the label of interfaith.